Hello and welcome. My name is Patti Napolitano, Professor Patti from Cleveland State University, and this is Planting Trees for Future Shade, which I could have just named it after you with a title like that.
I like the title.
I'm with Deacon Bill Merriman, friend to many, and we're in an agendaless conversation about community organizing, community engagement, building citizenship, building citizenship as a concept of belonging to a place and feeling like I have a stake in how my neighbors are faring and they have a stake in how I am faring.
Wow.
Small, easy.
Keep me accountable.
Keep me accountable.
Turn the conversation, bring me back. I've got Alzheimer's. Half of what goes in gets lost somewhere.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's like the dust of the universe, right?
I'm grateful to be talking with you at Carnegie West Library.
Yeah.
It is the core of the neighborhood, a place of learning, of service, of gathering. There are well-educated people here, and there are people who are close to illiterate, looking for shelter, looking for some direction in their lives. And it served me and my family, Jean and the two kids, well over the years.
Absolutely. I love being an Ohioan. I tell people this as often as I can, that in the state of Ohio, you have the right to belong to any library. And so I have a goal to have a library card all over the state of Ohio. And I do have so many on my keychain. I love using them for community spaces. One of the projects you and I have both been collaterally involved in, maybe peripherally involved in, is the Metanoia project. And in 2016, we were going through strategic planning and they had rented Cuyahoga County Library space. And I was just amazed. They're such beautiful facilities and they're free, for profit, not for profit. Since then, I did a project where I was providing in-home family trauma therapy. And the model that we were using was out of University of Maryland social work. And Maryland has a lot of the same redlining and working class and gentrification struggles and racial tensions and multi-ethnic tensions that Cleveland had around the same time. And they really believed in working in the community and helping patients, helping families utilize the community services available to them. Because so often, families that we work with and families that we serve don't feel citizenship, whether or not they have it. They feel very much other and very excluded. And like a library, well, they wouldn't want me there. It's supposed to be this hushed, quiet place. But there's tax help here, and they'll help you apply for a passport. And when I was taking my licensure exam, there's free licensure exam. You can do free test taking, and the librarians are so happy to help you access the funding and the resources they do have.
For those of us that are nearly computer illiterate, not only do they have computers galore, but they have printers and internet access and the willingness to print things that otherwise we wouldn't have access to.
Yeah, my mother, when she became an empty nester, they raised 5 of us. And when her last computer literate child moved out, she got rid of the computer. And she has only done computing at the library for the last 20 years because it's so distressing for her to do it on her own and to be on the phone with Geek Squad and try to get support. And she doesn't know the language that they're using or the terminology. Mm-hmm. So she said, if I need to print something, the librarians are so kind and they never make me feel like I'm dumb. And they always understand why it's confusing the way that it's set up.
It's welcoming, just like churches try to be welcoming.
Good churches try to be welcoming. Yeah.
It's interesting you're talking about community. Not once, but twice in this neighborhood, I've gone back home after being out on the streets for half a day or so. Maybe it's lunchtime, and encountered the group. The group would be a teacher, maybe a graduate student, and some undergraduates with clipboards and pads of paper and so forth. And at first, I was asking the question in ignorance. The second time, I think I knew the answer already. I said, "What are you guys doing here? This is the street where I live, Church Avenue,
Oh, yeah.
overlooking the lake and Detroit Avenue. What are you guys doing here?" They said, "We're from," maybe I won't mention the local school. It has an architecture department. It's not Cleveland State.
Mm.
They said, "We're taking a class on urban development, and we've been tasked with the responsibility to find a place and do some basic design for a community center that we've decided that what this neighborhood needs is a community center." And
Oh,
I said, "Well, how far have you gotten?" And I know the last time, the second group that I talked to over the years came across with the answer, "Well, we've designed a building that's going to incorporate meeting space and so on and so forth, and it'll be comfortable and secure." And I said, "Well," they said, "the first thing we have to do is get rid of these houses around here. They're just all in the way. And then it'll be a beautiful view of the lake, and this is where we're going to put our community center."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm, they represent perhaps waves of the future of people thinking that community is about designing buildings that people will come to, but rather than serving the people that live there to help them find what maybe they have a history of being a part of and something that they're looking for with help in their life. But so there's a disparity there. Fortunately, both of those classes seem to have graduated to other locations, and I never saw them again.
Yeah. I was thinking you were going to tell me, the C House, the West Side Community House, which is here.
But that's been closed and turned into, I think, condos or apartments, whichever, and a coffee shop that's very popular. And down in the basement, Cycle Cleveland is the bicycle advocacy group that's located in the basement.
So we're here on Cleveland's near West Side on Bridge Avenue. And I grew up here, and then my parents were unable to send us across the street to Kentucky schools. I grew up within vision of Kentucky Gardens. And so they participated, like so many families, in the white flight that was subsidized, the unofficial redlining that occurred in the 1980s of moving people into that belt around the city. And then I went to parochial schools. So I went to a private elementary school and then a private high school in Parma.
Mm-hmm.
And there are 2 St. Patrick's.
There's 4.
Well, in
2
Cleveland, I was in the poor one. You didn't want to be from St. Pat's on Bridge. You wanted to be St. Pat's Rocky River, which is not in Rocky River. It's just on Rocky River Drive.
But that Rocky River on your address made it look more classy.
Right.
And Bridge Avenue didn't look too classy then.
And this was not all of a sudden not a walkable neighborhood. So I had this disparate picture of the Cleveland, the Ohio City that we left with the Cleveland and Ohio City both my parents had grown up in. So my father was north of Lorain and my mother was south of Lorain. Mm-hmm. So my father never went into my mother's neighborhood, So there were still divides even within these small geographical spaces. But my father talks about in his childhood, after school, there were no latchkey kids. You went over to the Catholic club. And there was a bowling alley, and people sat at tables and did homework, and people wrote novenas. And when you were old enough, you drank beer out of the taps. I mean, the churches were community centers.
Yeah. Well, that's what the word church is all about, ecclesia. Ecclesia, it's community.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully the greater community, the community that's greater than my ethnic community or my economic scale community. It's community over the horizon community.
Yeah, which this Carnegie West Library is a beautiful example of, because we used to have a Hungarian language section for all of the people who lived in this area who spoke Hungarian. And now we have a large Spanish section.
That's true.
I grew up not realizing the Puerto Rican influence was that other people didn't have that. that there weren't Spanish language newspapers in everyone's neighborhood. And it was a very long time before I really understood like judging people who speak Spanish in public as being illegal immigrants, because all of them are citizens here. There was never a dynamic. It was like the third largest Puerto Rican community in the world was in Lorain, Ohio, around the Ford plants in the 70s and 80s.
And the shipyards.
And the shipyards.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So this library has continued to be a community center, and you have engaged in a formal way in ministry at St. Patrick's Church, but in an informal way across your lifetime in this area in community work. So for those people younger than me who don't get to know someone like you, I mean, I grew up with people just lousy like you. There's 10 other guys who were running around doing beautiful public works throughout my lifetime. Can you give us a little bit of hope about organizing and engaging people and lighting that spark of ownership in their community and how that goes, even in troubling times?
Going back to the encounter with those architecture students trying to build a community center, I think it's a matter of not doing something for people, but doing something with people. It's a matter of getting to know the people and wanting to serve them.
Yeah.
That for me, it's not for everyone. There are corporations, banks, and so forth that don't look at it that way. But what moves me, what empowers me, is the desire to make community happen. Community is typically spelled with a capital C in my heart.
Oh.
And I was fortunate. I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Chicago on the South Side. My first lifetime memory is waking up in my little bedroom, which was in my grandfather's house on Tallman Street around 59th, outside my bedroom window. And picture me on this, twin bed. The lights are out, but there's a window that's closed, and coming through the window is the light of a street lamp. It's maybe midnight or whatever. There's a bar across the alley, and still there's a sense in this gentle, soft light, a sense of peace and security that I felt planted in my heart. I don't know where that came from, and I think it's real. I don't think it's just my imagination. But that sense of security that was gifted to me in my early childhood seemed to find a place as the years went by. I didn't have a very exciting or busy life as a youngster, as a boy, a teenager, but I always had this sense of peace. I would look for the window, so to speak. When my mom and dad, father's house, they had been in that old house because he was sick, and then he was there for a while, but eventually they bought their own house, also on the South Side. And my memory of that room is facing the window in the late night, seeing the sky to the east towards Lake Michigan, blossoming a cherry ripe as they. I couldn't hear anything, but the whole sky was lit up with this red sacramental. It was so beautiful, and it reaffirmed my sense that I was cared for, that the world was good, that life was well. So I had, and my parents, by the way, had grown up, these were always taken care of. With those necessities always taken care of, I felt secure. You have to realize that a lot of people don't have that. They've never known what it means to not have any worries, to not have uncertainties gnawing at them. And you can try to create that sense of trust in life, trust in people, to extend that experience into the lives of other people. on an individual scale and on a social scale as well. Is life going to be trustworthy? Can we trust it or not? And I think I was blessed. I had that sense of being able to trust life. And so eventually I wasn't meant to stay on the south side of Chicago forever. Eventually I turned 21 and I got a notice from the draft board. I rode my bicycle down to 79th Street to the draft board, and they showed me a catalog of different military occupation specialties. And I turned through the pages. It was like a college catalog with pictures and course descriptions, how to load a 155 millimeter cannon and stuff like that. All those important things. Well, there's a picture of Fisherman's Wharf in Monterey, California. And I love John Steinbeck. So I'm sitting in this military office, with the sergeants and all the clerks and so forth. And I'm dreaming John Steinbeck and Big Sur and adventures and so forth. And so I joined a branch of the Army that cost me some years to take that course in my life. I ended up going to Monterey, California for a year and broke away from the family context, went through boot camp, but then I was in Monterey, hitchhiking down into Big Sur, hitchhiking up to San Francisco, exploring, living my dreams, and I was all right. One night I was hitchhiking through the valley, the San Joaquin Valley, and it was about 105 degrees. I think I was passing out from heat exhaustion, and a pickup truck came to a screeching halt. The guy backed up and he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm hitchhiking. I'm trying to get back to the post back in Monterey, California." And he says, "Can you go to a party first?" And I said, "Sure." He says, "I got a nephew who's going into the Army next week, and you're a GI. You can tell him what it's like." So we went to this party. He was very kind and gracious. He actually bought me a new shirt because the shirt I was wearing was dirty. And I spent the next few hours with this family that was letting go of their son, just as I let go of my family. They were very warm and kind. And when it came time for us to break up and go our separate ways, it was probably 1:00 in the morning. This guy was going to take me in his pickup truck still to a motel back on the interstate. And I said, "No, I know where I'm going. Just let me out right here." And he objected, and I assured him I'd be all right. I got out and I slept along the railroad tracks and at the side of the interstate. Got up in the morning. There was really not much traffic yet. I stood out on the interstate, put out my thumb, and a big old Cadillac came rolling along. And a black man said, "Where are you going, mister?" And I said, "I'm going back to Monterey." He said, "Come on." So I got in his Cadillac. I said, "Where are you going?" He says, "I'm going to church." It was about 7:00 in the morning. I don't know where his church was. He was going awfully early. And he said, "Where'd you come from?" And I said, "Well, somebody took me to a family party last night, and he wanted to take me to that motel, but I said, I'll take care of myself. I'll take care of it." So I slept along the railroad tracks back there. He said, "Mister, I used to sleep back there too."
I will tell you, I've counted several since the start of this conversation.
He said,
AWOL, you'll be in Leavenworth.
This man used to sleep there too.
The vagrancy of old white men hitchhiking and sleeping outdoors. I hear so many of these stories, and I just, it was a simpler time, I guess, to not worry that you were going to be murdered.
I could trust.
You could trust.
I could trust.
You did trust. It worked out.
There were a couple times where, when I was hitchhiking to school and high school and so forth, that I had to bust out of the car in a hurry because somebody's going to kill me. But other
than that, it was fine. So this is not a personal safety course, to clarify.
Yeah. So he brought me close to the road that went back towards Monterey, and the story of my life, continues.
So were you considered a draft, or did you volunteer for the draft? So then that's a 2-year or a 3-year?
the draft will give you 2 years. You can make it 3 or 4 depending on how much time you're going to burn up in a classroom. So I burned up a whole year, and that cost me 2 years. And I went to Ethiopia. See, I didn't go to Vietnam. I wasn't loading those cannons. I wasn't shooting anybody.
You
wasn't
weren't
getting
in a
shot.
tunnel, right?
And I was safe, even though I was, on the road again with Jack Kerouac and,
And you were in Ethiopia before Selassie?
No, he was there.
He was there.
Yeah, I saw him.
Yeah?
Yeah, looking out the window.
What do you think? There's some concerns he may have been the second coming.
And the Shah of Iran. He was in the car with him.
Wow.
Yeah.
I knew there was a special glow about you.
It's that sun. It's part of their shared emblem.
So tell me about your time in Ethiopia.
Well, I don't want to talk too much about it.
Is Ethiopia on the Horn?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's below, down the coast from Sudan, from Egypt and Sudan. And then south of Ethiopia is Djibouti and Somalia. And then you're down in Kenya.
So Ethiopia has Bantu peoples there.
No, Bantu are originally from the center of Africa, Congo. And then the people in Somalia there's a more aquiline feature, which is more common in Ethiopia, actually. And then the Bantu people were brought through Somalia in the slave trade.
I knew that there was a Somali Bantu and Somali. I didn't know it originated out of the Congo.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, the Congo is the broken heart of Africa. It's been under, and there's horrific human rights abuses now. So you have, I did not realize you were in Ethiopia. Now I know you, of course, as a social worker in this area, as the guy to talk to if I have a client who's a refugee. It's like in the social worker handbook, like, oh, have you called Bill? He knows a lot of things.
Thank you.
How long have you been connected with the refugee community in Cleveland?
Well, I wasn't going to be in the Army forever. After 4 years, I was going to come to the end of my hitch, and I made sure I extended my stay in Ethiopia much longer than I had to be. Normally, you would have stayed there for 18 months, I think, something like that. I stayed there for probably 2.5 years so that I would get out there, because if I knew that I didn't get out of the Army there in Ethiopia, I would never continue traveling and seeing the things I wanted in my heart to see. So I to the amazement of the people that could fill out the proper forms in Asmara, Ethiopia, I requested these forms and I filled out all the required information, and I was officially out of the Army, and I walked off the base. And I don't know if anyone had done that before.
Yeah.
Usually you'd get on a plane and go back to wherever you came from, and it was a little more less disjointed. But
you're not supposed to want to be there.
I'm sorry I didn't travel through Ethiopia more. I was in Eritrea, which is actually a colony of Ethiopia rather than Ethiopia, historically Ethiopia, but I was in a section that was being repressed by the central government. They were fighting for independence. So in a sense, I was in Vietnam, because there were these airplanes dropping bombs, including napalm, on people that were trying to defend their villages. I saw a little bit of what was going on over in Vietnam. I was glad I wasn't part of it. And I seemed to get along well with the people. I bicycled out to my work site. I got to know the people by name. My name was Hagos, Mr. Happy.
Oh, yeah.
And for 2.5 years, I rode mostly rode my bicycle out to the work site, probably about 4 or 5 miles out and back, rather than getting on the bus, the Army bus, and pedaled around Eritrea, went by motorcycle, jeep, and horse. Hi. So I did travel as much as I felt I could, and made the most of my stay there. typically living not on the base, but living in servants' quarters of GIs that were renting houses, and they typically had more space than they needed. In one occasion, it was the servants' quarters. Actually, originally, it was a chicken coop on the roof of the servants' quarters, and I would lay there in the night. Here's another window, with the 59th Street light burning, or the steel mill, but immense stars of the galaxy extending above the chicken screen of the chicken coop I was sleeping in.
That is something I would like to see.
Yeah. And then at 4:30, 5 o'clock, being awoken by the roosters, eating the food, cooking the food, learning a little bit of the language, just eating the goodness that was around me.
Yeah. Do you eat at the Ethiopian restaurants around here?
I have, but there's only a couple of them left. Empress Tattoo's closed.
I heard.
Yeah.
There's one that's open by me, by Cam's Corners now.
I've been down there, ate there once with Charlie and Marie.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was okay. Yeah. But if I eat, I like to spend time and eating in restaurants. I like to eat in people's kitchens and in people's family places.
We have Sunday dinner. It's 2 to 7 hours long. Arrive at 1 p.m., leave before bed.
Yeah. So, a couple invited me and 2 others out to supper at Hex last week. And it was lovely, except it's like, okay, how much time are you going to take? You're allowed to stay there forever. You can't lay down. You start reminiscing. You eventually got to go.
What's the point of visiting if you're not going to reminisce?
So I eventually got out. I went out to the airport outside of Asmara. It took a plane to Nairobi, and then I got on a narrow gauge train from Nairobi down to Moshe, Tanzania. Met a couple Peace Corps friends of mine that had taken some vacation. I knew them from Ethiopia, and we went up Kilimanjaro together. Again, starting as a 3-day trek from where we through the jungle up the slope, and at last on the conical cone to the top, to the peak called the light. I keep on running into this light, the sunrise over East Africa with all the fine red haze from the ambient dust of the Sahara in the air. It just adds a warmth.
The sun is different in different places. The latitude and the dust makes all the difference. It really does.
Dust makes all the difference.
It does.
Yeah.
So when you are working with people here, do they talk about missing the light, missing the sky?
I can't say that I haven't. I've been doing a test with people to find out what the light has been in their life. They typically family, typically where they grew up. But the people that I associated with, for the most part in the neighborhood, well, there's people that have all 4 legs on the ground, and there's people that are often just blown away. And among the people who are blown away, I think they have spiritual values that they hold to, that has been the light, whether it's what they've heard or what they've experienced about the light of God, Christ Jesus in their lives. This has been a privilege too. Yesterday I was sitting at the table with a woman and her son, and we started, before we ate our food, it was a whole bunch of different root vegetables all cooked together in a big pot. And but yeah, she knew that she could ask me, Deacon, do you want to say a prayer? And so, yeah, we shared a prayer just before we shared the food. We shared the heart. And then in the bowl that was mine, I saw that there was a piece of chicken, and she didn't have a piece of chicken in her bowl. So I reached in with my spoon and put my piece of chicken in her bowl. It's a small way of saying that what is wonderful in my life is a gift for your life as well.
Mm-hmm. I've been a trauma therapist for people who have been refugees to this country. I've been a parishioner alongside people who've been refugees. I've been very fortunate to have friends. Um, yes, and um, it's so amazing, the common humanity, the things that we remember, the things that wound us the most often are lost family and missing family and leaving children behind, or having children taken away and conscripted into a guerrilla warfare or into the government warfare. And all these losses I could not imagine surviving. And people survive with that light. And I have never had someone from Africa who wants to dwell on this hurt in trauma therapy. Never once. It's a completely different experience.
What do we anticipate it? Is another thing. Working with a couple Liberian women that were at a local nursing home, I was able to accompany a woman who finally succumbed to her illness. She died, but she didn't have the means for a proper burial. So what the nursing homes do is they have a contract with an undertaker that picks up the body from the nursing home, cremates it, and then disposes of the ashes in a common grave, a burial ground. And so with a woman who had been helping this person who died, we raised $4,000, and with the good graces of a funeral director, we were able to provide a proper burial that wouldn't be a scandal. Because as poor as the people are, they never consider that in the end they get burned up.
Yeah, my dear friend Aretha, when she passed, she just had the most beautiful gown and hat on. It brought me so much comfort to think this. It to me felt unfair. Her death felt so unfair to have a child still yet to raise. And I remember thinking, that she's clothed so regally and we can give her this honor with such a balm to my soul.
She wouldn't have been ashamed of the clothes that were provided.
She would not have been ashamed.
She would have gone like that.
But mostly women who I have met and had the honor to work with, they want to laugh and they want to count their blessings and they want to sit in the deep joy in spite of the pain and say, wow, look how God has blessed me to be here. Thank God that my child can be here. Aretha's daughter, Masanji, thank God that we have family here and that she can go on to be taken in by a family and continue to pursue her life and look for her siblings and try to bring them here as well. And that is the hope that we want to be able to capture and not look at people as pitiable. Oh, these poor people, oh, these things have been done, and to think that people are capable of less or their life trajectory will be lesser than someone else's because of harm that has come to them. So how do we make a space for that in our communities? Can you talk about the way that you've done it just with parks and the Zone Rec Center, for example? One of the Zone Rec Center that we take for granted, Zone in Estabrook. And was there a third one that came along with it?
Well, over the course of time, it was obvious that the neighborhood was underserved with regards to recreation centers. The closest one was Cadell, West Boulevard in Detroit, and the other one was Estabrook over by the zoo. But nothing was afforded to this neighborhood, maybe because it was considered to be a poor neighborhood, and it just didn't have much collateral going for it. There weren't enough votes, although in terms of registered voters, it should have been a portion,
But there weren't enough votes within city council to be
There's that.
actionable towards this neighborhood.
yeah, even the councilwoman for the neighborhood back when I first arrived, Margaret McCaffrey, was holding down the seat for the party, the Democratic Party, because of her name, because her name was similar to a popular previous councilman, McCafferty, Thomas McCafferty. Well, he died, and they were looking for someone who they could get in there easily, and her name was close enough, so people voted for her. And what was her role? She didn't even live here. She lived with her daughter in Seven Hills and had maintained an apartment on Clinton around 45th Street. And the chair people of the various committees would just tell her how to vote, and they would always count on her vote. So she held the job, and she provided support for the other councilmen. But in the meantime, the neighborhood was overlooked and neglected. At one point, there was just constant pressure to get the funding and the place for a recreation center, and it was proposed that the city could buy a Hungarian social club that was over on roughly 41st and Lorraine. There's a community garden over there now, and but they wouldn't consider a new building, a 20th century. This place was a wreck of a 19th century building. And then the place burned down, and it was a non-question.
Is this next to where Bodnar's was?
Yep.
I love that
the
spot.
Old Hungarian, the old Hungarian social club was over there. So what
we were talking about the zone rec center was going to be in there, but
yeah.
How did you leverage these relationships, understanding city council to get it put in where it was put in?
Well, it was more like it came through anything I did in particular. There was a Mrs. Fisher who was a neighborhood activist on 52nd Street and south of Lorraine, who was constantly pushing to keep the numbers of bars down and to get that recreation center built.
So Mrs. Fisher was someone who attended town halls.
Yep.
And wrote letters.
Glenna Fisher.
But she was not someone who held office.
No.
Okay.
She was the real power broker.
Yeah, and we have power and powerful planning. We need to talk about the informal sources of power in the community.
Yeah. She had a couple of kids. It was her husband was, he was kind of worn out from hard work, a lifetime of hard work. But Glenna kept every week there were community meetings to go to, and Glenna was there again and again and again, apparently not making any progress. And the other thing that was on Glenna, so I'm talking about Glenna Fisher now, not me. The other thing on Glenna's, in her sites, was the fact that historically, over the course of the previous 10 years, half her neighborhood had been torn down for Interstate 90. Businesses, churches, schools, school buildings, structures, parks.
They became unwalkable, unrideable. If you could walk up to the bus line, you can't do it anymore.
That's true, yeah. Neighbors were cut off from one another. Grocery stores were eliminated. Churches were eliminated. Churches that needed every family to, as much as possible to be enrolled, so to float the budget, suddenly lost half of their congregation because those blocks were torn down and those people had to move. And the churches themselves became weakened.
Was this the 1970s?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, it's amazing that these things were in the newspaper before they were on the radio. That the Ohio Department of Transportation was going to continue the Interstate 71 extension from roughly 61st, 63rd, and Denison up to 45th and Detroit. And Glenna Fisher got on the phone, and she says that's That's to the west of me. They've already killed everybody to the south of me. Now they're going to kill everybody to the west of me, and they're going to just wreck the neighborhood coming north from Lorain up to Detroit, from between 53rd and 45th. So she got on the phone and, of course, got in touch with the council person at the time, Michael Zone, and some phone calls were made, and the plans had to be changed. First of all, they were stopped, and then they were changed. So instead of proceeding with funding and bringing in the architects and surveyors to extend the freeway system from roughly between Lorain and Clark, to just drive a stake into the ground and saying, right now, there's going to be a cooling off period. And in the cooling off period, people began to remember that there was a promise about a recreation center. So the miracle is two things were accomplished with one stroke. The vicious cancer of the interstate system coming through the heart of the neighborhood and finishing the job on near West Side, destroying what would become Ohio City and Detroit Shoreway, weakening it anyway.
So we had very big federal dollars and state dollars saying, you know what you need here. And the people in the community said, do you know what we need
here? You're not listening to us.
Yeah.
You're not listening. Yeah. Some meetings were held. There were marches on City Hall to the Monday City Council meetings, and suddenly people started to imagine that it could be different. It could be that maybe we had enough freeways, and maybe we could get that recreation center after all, and that's thus the birth of the Michael Zone Recreation Center at 65th and Lorain.
And to this day, I keep trying to replicate the funding for the program that taught me how to swim. I attended Trinity Lutheran Preschool, and they took us in a 15-passenger van to Michael J. Zone, and we would change into our suits, and they'd give us the little board, and we'd kick across and kick back, which really came in handy because I could then walk with my grandmother down to Edgewater Beach and go swimming. Yeah.
And she didn't have to be afraid.
And she didn't have to be afraid. So,
but I can't. I was in the neighborhood. I was part of who we were and what we did. But I have to give the credit to Glenna Fisher.
Yeah. Well, thank you for speaking her name into existence, into perpetuity here.
And the bars.
And the bars.
The bars between 25th and 65th. There must have been 50 bars. The city was granting permits to open another bar, one after another, and on weekends it was a hell.
It was not the soft glow of the light outside.
No,
because
it was fearful.
Yeah,
drunken driving, racing, drag racing, and not just alcohol, but drugs, hard drugs, being sold up and down the street. It was tough.
Now you left off getting out of the military, going through Nairobi and taking a train and going up Kilimanjaro.
Yeah.
I'm presuming that you got back to the U.S. around age 27.
Well, before I did that, I hitchhiked around Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, slept outside in the bush.
Did not get eaten by lions. So happy.
Wasn't waylaid. I think people took care of me. I would find out where the market is, and I would eat the rice and beans or the equivalent, mashed plantain, whatever they had. Eat the same diet that the poorest of the poor ate, and like it. I got along quite well for those 90 days in East Africa, and then I got on an old converted freighter, a steamship, the state of Haryana, that was carrying Asians that were being evicted from East Africa by the governments as they achieved their independence. They were moving these people back to Pakistan and India. So I had my own personal section of a piece of plywood to sleep on the steamship. And like I said, it's just bottom of the barrel, and I was safe. I was safe. Ate with the people in the mess, and arrived in Bombay or Mumbai, and slept under the gateway to India, which is a huge triumphal arch that glorified the historic past of the British Crown colony. But at night, where I slept, it was running with rats. But so that got
That sounds like the British monarchy and all its gifts to me, running with rats.
This isn't the unfolding of my flower. I ran into a couple Canadian hitchhikers, and they said, well, you really ought to go visit this Parsi man. He's a Persian, north of Mumbai, Bombay. And I got on a train and I went up north of Bombay and stayed for a month with Rustum Doktor. He was a Zoroastrian, a Parsi man that took the gospel seriously. The gospel is every day is a struggle between the forces of darkness and light. And so he built an orphanage and he built a clinic and he helped build a hospital and a farm program for blind people.
Yeah.
They raise their own food, and I stayed with him for a good while. And he made the people in his community kind of nervous because he always did things that they were supposed to talk about in the temple, not do. And he would do it out in the street rather than the temple.
This is a prayerful thought, not a behavior.
Yeah. And I went a little bit farther to Rishikesh on the Ganges and stayed for a good while in a hut along the banks of the Ganges, watching the river go by, cooking my rice and dal, beans on dried cow dung, and then finally up to Mussoorie, up in the foothills of the Himalayas, the Himalaya mountains, the soft snow-covered Himalayas, and hiking up there with a friend of mine. And then this is an important little feature. One day, a Canadian friend of mine came by where I was staying, and we talked. We were good buddies, and he said, "Do you want to say the Lord's Prayer?" And I said, "Oh, sure." So we said, "There, Father," and he said, "I'll see you later." He went home to where he lives, and I started packing my bags because instead of going to Kathmandu in Nepal, which was my next step, I decided that I would go back through the Khyber Pass on my way back to Chicago. So even going through the Khyber, we went down through, and then they were like school bus types of buses. They just jammed with adults and goats and chickens and rolled up carpets in these apparent vehicles that looked like school buses. And then once we got down at the bottom of the Khyber Pass, it pulled over to the side of a jungly area so we could go relieve ourselves, women and men, chickens and goats.
Mm-hmm.
And as I approached the tree line, there was a tribal man with Afghanis were fighting the Russians. He takes the safety off on his rifle, and he's thinking in his mind that maybe I'll shoot this guy because he looks like he's a Russian.
Is this the 1960s?
69.
69.
Yeah. So I went and did my business, and he still got the rifle ready to maybe, I could read his mind. Should I or should I not? Should I or should I not? And I heard the safety go off again. He put down the gun. He decided not to. So I have to thank that man.
Mm-hmm.
So I did finally get back to the States and greeted my family on the modest house on the side. They had the basement set up with a small bed and some furniture. It was late at night, so I laid down, turned off the lights, and woke up about maybe 1 or 2 in the morning. I don't remember what time it was, but I couldn't find a light switch because it was all dark and I was in an unfamiliar place. I was looking for the light, and finally I found like a small TV screen, that cheap TV with a small screen like that. And I said, oh, if I turn this on, I'll get the light. And I could see what I'm doing because I can't find the darn light. So I turned that little knob and the little screen lit up. And I'm looking at it, and the room is filling with this not very bright light, but it's a picture of a man walking backwards, coming down the ladder. and putting his foot on the moon.
Wow.
And I said to myself, I know what it's like because for 3 years I had been out of what we take for granted. Everything that we took for granted didn't necessarily work for 3 years. And now I was back into a different game plan again. And I felt like I was still looking for a place to put my foot down.
Mm-hmm.
And where I put my foot down was trying to make sense of everything that had happened for 3 years of living among people that were 1 or 2 days away from starvation, where African people were not plump. They were skeletal, where if people had a job, they might make the equivalent of $1 a day if they had a job, and maybe they would never get a job that paid $1. Where people were beaten to death and shot to death in napalms.
Yeah. People often say grocery stores are really overwhelming when they come back to the States.
I was disoriented, I would guess. One step for mankind. I'm trying to remember the.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
thinking of what my purpose in that was, I thought maybe I should go back to school. I did go to college again for a little while, but I didn't stay because I guess I fell on my brain or something as a kid. It doesn't work that way. My gifts don't work that way. I just found my gifts working among people, living among people, trying to know people, knowing their needs, and walking with people.
Yeah. You're a companion.
Okay.
A companion on the journey.
Yeah. So eventually I did find my way. I had been at John Carroll back in Cleveland, so I went to Cleveland, got involved in anti-war demonstrations. By my fellow soldiers, I was, or maybe it was the Cleveland police.
I thought you would have been involved in the Department of Peace stuff, Dennis Kucinich.
No, not Dennis. He came along. Ralph Perk was the Stokes was the mayor.
John Carroll was where St. Ignatius is now when you attended?
Oh no, they've been out in University Heights for a long time.
So were you in University Heights when you went to John Carroll? I didn't realize.
I was renting a bedroom from Mrs. Jacobson, a Jewish widow. Mm-hmm. And every night she gave me a couple cookies and a cup of tea.
Oh, nice.
It wasn't about my attending anti-war demonstrations, which I did, or enrolling or even leading classes on nonviolent change, which I did. But what the pivotal moment was, coming into a weekend, a friend of mine, Mike, said that he'd like to show me a neighborhood. Mind you, I'd been living in University Heights. Mm-hmm. Wanted to show me this neighborhood. And so on a Friday night, we got in this little Nash Rambler and came down Lorraine and Carnegie Avenue over the Lorraine-Carnegie Bridge and swung north on 32nd Street and circled around St. Patrick's Church. Looked at the house where students were living and giving their time in service to the neighbors. It was at 38th and Whitman.
Was it a Catholic worker house?
It was called the Greenhouse.
The Greenhouse at 38th and Whitman.
Yeah, there were 2 houses next to the Catholic worker house. There was 2 more houses. One was the White House. The White House was the not Danny, but the other Napolitano.
Rachel?
No, your dad's brother.
Ralph Norman. Norm was over there.
And the Adams were in the White House. Yeah, the middle White House, and then I was in the Greenhouse, and we lived there, and we were available to help people who needed a hand.
So you knew my Uncle Norman?
Yeah.
He was my godfather.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
See?
I always say my godfathers were Norm and Pat, and they were the first of my dad's siblings to die. And so I tell my siblings, my godparents have been in heaven in a state of grace, praying for me. So I got the best ones.
Yeah.
Praying on their knees.
Yeah. But that was that step on the ladder landed at 38th in Whitman, because that's where I felt I had been going all along.
Now you were Catholic, but you were not a deacon until later in life.
It's correct. In 97, I was ordained. Started studying around 94.
So you had your ministry, your vocation, your way of being, and you also had a job, 9 to 5. Now, after the military, you were a postman, weren't you?
Yeah. For a while when I came here, I worked with kids.
Mhm.
Kids wasn't a very effective outreach worker, but so I'm statistically, I don't have much to show for myself, but there's one incident that I carry in my heart now for several years. I was a mailman in the beginning, working out at 66th and Lorraine, Station A. And it was a terribly hot and sweltering day. I was at the end of the workday, I walked out the back door and I was just grimy and sweaty and aching from exhaustion. I was going to walk over to 65th and Lorraine to catch the bus down Lorraine and go home. But I just barely started walking past the front of the Station A, the post office, when a junky old tow truck, wasn't a very fancy one. It looked like it shouldn't have been on the road. It didn't look safe. This beat up old tow truck came to a screeching halt, pulling over to the curb, and this grease monkey jumps out with this glaring expression on his face and said, "Are you Bill Merriman?" And I thought he wanted to, I said, where's his tire? I thought he was going to cave my head in. And I was backing up to the brick wall at the front of the post office. I said, "Yeah." He says, "I've been looking for you." I said, "Why?" "Because you don't know me." I'm thinking, "Oh no, I don't know you. I'm Billy Martin," he says. This is after a couple of years of unsuccessful youth outreach worker activities. "What for?" He says, "When I was a kid, you did all those things for us. My father was a drunk and he never did anything for us. All he did was add his bottle. And we never went anywhere, grew up as kids, never went to Edgewater, never went fishing until you came along."
Yeah, you were the angel in the nursery.
Into the nursery?
Angels in the nursery. Yeah, that's what we call them in family therapy.
Oh.
Yeah.
He said, you were the only one. And I've been looking for you to say, I'm sorry. Backstory. I'm looking at him, he says, "You remember, you took us camping down in Holmes County. In your friend's country house or whatever it was. He had this old house. And when you weren't looking, we smashed the windows on your friend's car. And you got so upset, you drove us home and let us out. But then you came back. And I've been waiting all these years to say, I'm sorry."
And God made that opportunity for him.
Yeah,
How
for both
beautiful.
of us. Yeah.
Neither one of you could have arranged it.
And what lit in my heart was, this guy's in the program.
Yeah.
He's making amends.
Yeah.
I don't care. I'll buy it. Yes. Hallelujah.
Yeah. I love to co-sign on someone else's piece.
Yeah.
Give me a chance.
Oh.
I just went to brunch with Kathy, and we've done all kinds of things. You know, we're two women who have had successful careers, and we've got the pedigree and whatever. And what did we talk about at brunch? She was doing a case. She was helping a person, and she got her a job. And she said, "Patti, so many things have gone wrong." And she's had that job 3 years, and I'm just so proud. And I said, "Yeah, I had one. I was taking a kid to the mall, and there is this guy who I just went to bat for him when he was 25, and no one believed in him. And I said, let's give him a chance." And he said, "I've spent 2 weeks of my adult life out of prison, and I think that's it for me. I think I'll just be in prison the rest of my life. No one's ever going to take and he took his chance. And he's been at this job 4 years. I had to go to the restroom. I was like tearing up. I was so happy.
Oh.
The gifts that just compound over time are really beautiful. And they come from not the best evidence-based intervention
Mhm.
and not the best textbook or the best textbook
Mhm.
answers.
Mhm.
It's in those human moments. So I feel like in community organizing and engaging communities, we want to build opportunities within our communities for some of those core childhood memories of laying under the stars and just gazing into the universe and the universe gazing back at you. Or someone who you did something impulsive and they came down on you and then they came back and
Mhm.
demonstrated you don't need to be perfect to
Mhm.
have dignity and worth as a person. There's a lot of lights out there. There's a
Mhm.
lot of people out there. And I'm very excited about planting trees for future shade. I'm excited about making stories and the research. There's like 10 different times where I was like, oh, this story you're telling lines right in with this research article of anthropologists and sociologists and social workers who look at what works in communities and these elements of entering into a community and helping people feel invested and like they can solve the problem and they learn the skills so they can go on solving the problem after you leave and not needing to be the solution or provide the solution, but asking them, how do you define the problem? How do you define the strengths? How do you how do you feel that your neighbors are ready to rise to this challenge? And then we just write grants and get other people, all those robber barons got to spend their money on something.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I wanted to go 90 minutes and we've gone an hour and 2. Closing thoughts.
I think in the Catholic tradition, they had, and Lutheran and a lot of the denominations, they make a big deal of sacraments. I think the neighborhood is a sacrament. There's supposed to be 7 sacraments, baptism, communion, et cetera.
Yeah.
I think community is the deepest sense of community where people give themselves, maybe in response to all the other stuff, but they give themselves to one another, letting that seed swell and burst into new life, and not just that our lives. We find that in communities like this, and I think this is a real effective example, a real good. I think social workers and professors ought to come down here and just go through this community and with a fine tooth comb, while as much of it is still around as there is today. Talking with the old ladies and the old men and asking for stories. And
well, I say I'm interviewing for my social work class, and I have a disproportionate number of ministers because when you're going to do programming, this is who's providing spaces and who's providing open doors and tables to break bread is churches that are carrying out that mission. So can you define a little bit more the Catholic, specifically the Catholic notion of sacrament and how community programs meet that criteria for you?
I'm not, I was telling you way back when that I must have fallen on my head because I can't remember everything.
Yeah.
But I do know that a sacrament is supposed to be an outward sign that provides evidence of that's maybe represented symbolically, but it actually comes into reality, into existence. And I think the grace of God working in our lives happens when people come close to one another, lower barriers, develop trust for one another, and truly give themselves, find themselves in giving themselves to other people, even to people they don't know and people who will never provide any benefit for them just because they're people. Out of the sheer delight of seeing those lives grow and have any chance. We're looking for relationships, and a relationship ultimately meaning we're one family, one body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many Christian faiths will say there's two sacraments, right? The biblical sacrament of baptizing
Yeah,
Jesus,
yeah.
and that outward sign is the dove.
Okay,
And then marriage is another sacrament,
that's another one. Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Catholics have so many formal. We have 7 formal
and then
ones.
there's what they call sacramentals. Those are the day-to-day things.
Sacramentals. So I think of corporate works of mercy and spiritual works of mercy as being sacramentals then.
Uh-huh. And
Yeah.
transforming
So it's something that you can see.
and experience.
That's an outward sign, or it's something you can experience
And
that's an
live.
outward sign.
Yeah. Live and celebrate and smile on your face, with a smile on your face as you roll over at night.
I hope. I love that feeling. I mean, and being with you, I feel like we always have a good conversation and sense of communion, and it does fill me with, it puts a smile on my face, that I can, it's almost like a feeling of job well done. Like I can rest a little bit because I've entered into this reminiscing place.
Very special place.
You're a special guy.
And all the things I thought I'd talk about, I think I forgot to talk about.
I know, I keep saying I want to come up with questions, but this has been so fruitful. And I feel like the people who are joining with us, I don't know if anyone's joining us live, but the people who will be watching are really going to appreciate this and appreciate there's a natural humility that you have, and also your joy at sharing all the lessons that you've learned along the way. You know that saying, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Yeah, you bring these people to life, really, when you speak to them. It's like they're here visiting with us.
My wife is she was deceased 5 years, just the last past 30th of January. She's dead 5 years, but she's like this. She birthed me, and was evidence to me in my life with her of what life was all about. Caring, loving, cherishing. And then the 2 kids that came out of our marriage, they so impressed me. And I'm thinking, where's that coming from?
I love to see your sons standing next to Jean in church. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I want to thank you for joining. Please subscribe. Subscribe to St. Patrick's Church on Bridge. We're looking for a new deacon. If you know anyone, new or old seminarians, preferably young. We need someone with some miles left.
But then again, if you're unsure how many miles you have left and you're going to step forward and give it anyway, it can be a gift.
Yeah, all we can give is today, the gift of time today.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.